It was an ordinary Thursday morning in the small town of Meadowbrook. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow across the horizon. Birds chirped from the trees, and the streets were still mostly empty, save for the occasional car that passed by. The town was known for its tranquility and friendly neighbors, where the biggest news was usually the arrival of a new bakery or the end of a local sports season. No one expected anything out of the ordinary to happen on that day. At the edge of the town stood a modest house with a small yard, fenced in by a low wooden fence. This was where 9-year-old Lucy Thompson lived with her single mother, Carol. Carol worked as a nurse at the local clinic, and Lucy spent most of her mornings playing outside while her mom prepared for her long shifts. She was an energetic, imaginative child with a love for animals. Lucy had a best friend named Max, an aging German shepherd who had been with her since she was just a baby. Max wasn't just a pet, he was her protector, her confidant, and her constant companion. Max had seen it all. From the first steps Lucy took to the day she started kindergarten, Max had been by her side. His once white fur had turned a little grayer over the years, and the springs in his legs weren't as bouncy as they used to be, but his loyalty and courage had only grown stronger with time. That morning, Lucy sat on the front porch, her legs crossed as she doodled on a notepad with a set of colorful markers. Max lay next to her, his head resting on his paws, his watchful eyes scanning the neighborhood. He had always been protective of her, even if she didn't quite understand the full extent of his vigilance. The quiet morning felt almost like a dream, with the world moving in slow motion, and Lucy was lost in her drawings. Her mother had left for her shift at the clinic, reminding Lucy to stay close and to keep an eye on Max. But today, the ordinary morning would soon become anything but. Just down the road, behind the cover of a row of bushes, a man lingered, watching. He had been there for hours, his eyes scanning the area, waiting for the perfect moment. His face was hidden beneath a hood, his posture tense as he observed the house. His eyes narrowed when they settled on Lucy. She was alone, oblivious to the danger lurking nearby. His plan had been simple. Wait until her mother left, then approach the little girl when she was distracted. No one would be around to stop him. No one except for the dog. But even that didn't seem to worry him. Max was old, after all. The man's hand twitched as he reached for something hidden beneath his jacket, and he started to move toward the yard. Lucy didn't see him at first. She was too absorbed in her drawings. But Max did. And when he did, something changed in his eyes. The calm, protective gaze turned sharp. Max's ears perked up, and he slowly stood up, his body stiffening, alert. He growled softly, a low rumble that only Lucy could hear. She glanced at him, noticing the change in his behavior. "Max? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Max didn't answer, of course, but his growl deepened, louder now. The hairs on his back stood on end. Lucy felt a chill creep up her spine. Before she could ask another question, she saw the man step into the yard, his eyes fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. He was moving fast, his footsteps quick and deliberate. Max's growl grew louder, more insistent, and before Lucy could even process what was happening, the man lunged toward her. In that moment, Max's instincts kicked into overdrive. With a burst of energy, Max launched himself between Lucy and the man, his teeth bared. The attacker was taken off guard, momentarily stumbling back. Max's growl turned into a snarl as he faced the man, his body tensed, ready to defend his young charge. Lucy gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen Max act like this before. His eyes were fierce, filled with an unwavering determination. The man hesitated, sizing up the dog, but his hunger for his victim overpowered his caution. He made another move, reaching out for Lucy, but Max was quicker. The dog's powerful jaws locked onto the man's arm, biting down with a strength that shocked both the attacker and the child. The man screamed, more in surprise than pain, and tried to pull away, but Max's grip was unrelenting. The dog was willing to fight with every ounce of strength he had to protect his friend. Max's teeth sank deeper, and he didn't let go, even as the man lashed out, kicking and swinging his fists in desperation. Lucy's heart raced as she scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. The scene was chaotic, the man swearing and struggling, Max holding on with everything he had. The dog was injured. Lucy could see the blood on Max's fur, staining his coat as the man managed to pull free, his arm raw and bloody. But Max didn't back down. He stood his ground, still between Lucy and the attacker, protecting her with everything in his body. The man cursed again and looked at the dog, realizing this wasn't a fight he could win. With a final look of anger at Lucy, he turned and fled, disappearing into the nearby woods. Lucy stood frozen for a moment, still processing what had just happened. Then she rushed to Max's side, her eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "Max, you saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Max turned his head slowly toward her, his body trembling from exhaustion, but his eyes were still full of love. He had saved her, and in that moment, Lucy knew that there was no one in the world more brave or more loyal than her dog. But the danger wasn't over. And Max's fight had only just begun. Max's body trembled as Lucy knelt beside him, her small hands gently brushing his fur. She could feel the warmth of his blood against her fingers, a stark contrast to the cold morning air. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed the fear aside, focusing entirely on her dog. He had been hurt protecting her. She couldn't let him suffer. Max, stay with me, okay?" Lucy whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. She wasn't sure what to do, but she knew she had to get help. Max's breathing was shallow, and he whimpered softly as he lay on the grass, his head resting against the ground. The wound on his side looked worse the more Lucy looked at it, but the dog's eyes remained fixed on her, his gaze unwavering. His tail gave a small wag, a reassuring gesture despite the pain. She felt a rush of gratitude, but her mind quickly turned to action. She knew she had to act fast. Lucy jumped up, her heart still racing as she ran toward the house, calling out for help. "Mom, Mom," but there was no answer. Of course, her mom wouldn't be home for hours. She was alone. Max couldn't wait that long. Panic began to claw at Lucy's chest. What if Max didn't make it? What if he died? She wasn't sure what to do, but she remembered her mom's first aid training. There was a kit in the garage, something she'd seen her mother use when she'd injured herself once. She ran to the garage, opened the door, and grabbed the kit. It felt too heavy in her hands as she sprinted back to the yard. When Lucy reached Max again, her fingers shook as she knelt down beside him, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Max's eyes locked onto hers again, that same loyal, trusting look still there despite everything. He wasn't leaving her. She opened the first aid kit, trying her best to steady her hands as she found the bandages. But before she could do anything, a low growl rumbled from behind her. Lucy froze. There, standing at the edge of the yard, was the man. His hood was down now, revealing a scruffy face and cold, unforgiving eyes. He wasn't nearly as injured as Max, but the fury in his expression told Lucy everything she needed to know. He wasn't going to give up. Max's growl intensified, his body tense despite his wounds. The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're safe?" The man's voice was rough, almost like a hiss. He didn't sound like someone who had just been bitten by a dog. He sounded angry, dangerously angry. "You'll pay for that. Both of you." Lucy's heart raced, but Max's presence beside her gave her a strange sense of calm. He was still hurt, but he was still here. And he wasn't backing down. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing for a plan. The man was close, much closer now, and Lucy knew she couldn't outrun him. She couldn't defend herself, not without Max. But maybe she could do something to get help. "Go, Max. Go," she shouted, her voice hoarse. She turned toward the fence, her eyes wild with panic. There was a neighbor who lived 2 houses down, Mrs. Granger. She was always home. Maybe if she screamed loud enough, someone would hear. Max understood. He didn't need words. With a growl that shook the air, he lunged forward, his body still weak from the earlier fight but his spirit stronger than ever. The man wasn't expecting it. Max's teeth sank into his leg, and the man howled in pain, stumbling back. For a split second, Lucy saw the terror in the man's eyes. He wasn't prepared for the dog's unrelenting assault. Max's jaws clamped down harder, holding him in place. The man tried to kick Max off, but he wasn't strong enough. He was losing his balance, his rage giving way to fear. "Get off me!" the man screamed, his face contorting with fury and pain. Lucy's heart pounded as she looked for a way to help. She wasn't strong enough to overpower him, but Max was. Max could take him down if he had to. Lucy's mind raced. What could she do? Then, she spotted it. Just beyond the man, tucked beneath a tree, was a large garden rake. Without thinking, Lucy dashed for it, her heart pounding in her ears. She grabbed the rake, holding it like a weapon, and ran toward the man who was still struggling to shake Max off. "Get away from him," Lucy yelled, her voice filled with a mix of fear and defiance. The man turned, eyes filled with contempt, as if the sight of a young girl holding a rake was laughable. But Lucy's eyes were locked on him with pure determination. She was willing to fight to protect her dog. Max, sensing the moment, shifted his grip on the man's leg and stepped back. For a brief second, the man was free, just enough time for Lucy to act. She swung the rake, the long handle catching the man in the ribs with a sickening thud. He staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The man looked at her, fury in his eyes, but there was a hint of uncertainty now. "You really think you can stop me?" he growled. Lucy's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't back down. "Yes, you're not taking me, or Max." Max, ever the protector, growled again, ready for another round if necessary. He was injured, but his determination was as strong as ever. He wasn't going to let this man get any closer to Lucy. The man clenched his fists, eyes darting between the girl and the dog, before he made a split-second decision. With a final, seething glare, he turned and bolted, disappearing into the woods. Max remained on guard, his body tense and his eyes watching the retreating figure, but slowly, the tension left his muscles. Lucy dropped the rake and rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she stroked his fur. "Max, you did it. You really did it," she whispered through tears, hugging him tightly. The dog's breathing was labored, but he nudged her gently, as if reassuring her that he was still there. The danger had passed, for now. But Lucy knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, she and Max were in this together. And nothing would ever separate them. Max's breathing was still shallow, but it was steady. Lucy, her hands covered in blood, some of it hers, some of it Max's, clung to her dog, unwilling to leave his side. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The man had come back, but he had been driven off. The ordeal wasn't over, but Max had saved her life again. Despite his injuries, he had never hesitated. Lucy sat beside him, rubbing his ears gently as tears streamed down her face. The pain in her heart was intense, but it was mingled with a deep sense of gratitude. Max had always been there, but now, more than ever, he was her hero. A few minutes passed, though it felt like hours, before Lucy stood up and hurriedly grabbed the first aid kit again. She had to do something to stop Max's bleeding. The dog's fur was matted with blood, and his coat was weighed down with it. She tried to steady her hands as she tore open sterile gauze and antiseptic wipes, trying to remember the first aid lessons she'd seen her mom give her when she had scraped her knee or cut her finger. But this was different. This was Max, her protector. She gently cleaned the wound on his side, holding his head in her lap as she worked. Max looked up at her with tired eyes, still panting but trusting her completely. He wasn't going anywhere. "Hold on, buddy. Just a little longer," Lucy whispered, wiping the tears from her face. "Mom will be home soon. We'll get you to the vet, and you'll be okay. I promise." The sounds of the world beyond her little yard seemed distant, muted in comparison to the terrifying events that had unfolded. All she could hear now was Max's soft breathing and her own heartbeat, racing in her chest. Suddenly, a car pulled up in front of the house, and Lucy's breath caught in her throat. Her mom's car. Carol Thompson stepped out of the car, her expression unreadable at first. Her eyes immediately darted to the front yard where Lucy was kneeling beside Max. "Lucy? Oh, my God," Carol breathed, rushing over. "What happened?" She dropped to her knees beside Lucy and Max, her hands already moving to check on the dog's condition. Lucy could hardly speak. She simply pointed toward the woods, where the man had disappeared. "He tried to take me," Lucy said hoarsely, the words finally coming out in a rush. "He tried to kidnap me. But Max." Max stopped him. Her voice broke as she spoke, and the tears that had been threatening to spill finally poured down her face. Carol's face went pale. She looked from Lucy to Max, who was still lying there, exhausted but steadfast. She could see the wounds, the blood soaked into his fur. Carol's hands shook as she gently touched Max's head, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Max," she whispered, "you saved her." Lucy nodded. "He fought him off, Mom. He bit him. And then when the man came back, Max protected me again." Carol wrapped her arms around Lucy, pulling her close. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. But Max is a hero. He's the bravest dog I've ever known." Max let out a small groan, as if in agreement, and then rested his head on Lucy's lap once more. Carol, her eyes welling up with tears, ran to the garage and grabbed her phone. "We need to get him to the vet right away. Stay here, Lucy. Stay with Max. I'll call the police too." Lucy nodded again, not taking her eyes off Max. Her dog, the one who had always been there, had always made sure she was safe. He had saved her life today, and she didn't know what she would have done without him. It wasn't long before an ambulance arrived as well, just to check on Max's condition. By the time they loaded him into the car, Lucy was in the back with him, her hands never leaving his side. As the car sped down the road toward the vet, Lucy's thoughts drifted back to that morning. She had been drawing, lost in her own little world, not knowing that the next few hours would change her life forever. Not knowing that she would need her dog more than she ever had before. They arrived at the vet clinic, and Max was immediately whisked away into the treatment area. The technicians worked quickly to stabilize him, and Lucy was left in a small waiting room with her mother. "I'm so proud of you," Carol said softly, sitting beside her daughter and taking her hand. "You were so brave, but you didn't have to do it alone. You've got people who love you, Lucy. You've got me, and you've got Max. And he's not going anywhere. I promise you." Lucy squeezed her mom's hand, her own mind still reeling. She could still hear the man's voice, still feel the panic in her chest when he came for her. But now, in the quiet of the waiting room, she felt a flicker of peace. Max was safe. He was strong. And he had protected her with everything he had. A few hours later, the vet finally came out to speak with them. Max had lost a lot of blood, but he was a fighter. His injuries would take time to heal, but he would make a full recovery. The vet assured them that Max would be okay. Lucy could hardly believe the words. "Can I see him?" Lucy asked, her voice shaky but full of hope. The vet smiled gently and nodded. "Of course. Just be careful with him. He's a little woozy from the pain medication, but he's awake and asking for you." Lucy stood up, her heart swelling with relief. Her mom gave her a warm, reassuring smile and followed her down the hallway toward Max's recovery room. When Lucy entered the room, Max was lying on a bed, his head raised slightly, his eyes bright and alert despite the bandages wrapped around his body. The moment he saw her, his tail gave a slow wag. Lucy walked over and sat beside him, stroking his fur with a tender smile. "You're going to be okay, Max," she whispered. "You're my hero." Max let out a soft, almost contented sigh, his eyes half closing as he rested his head on her lap. Lucy knew in that moment that they would be okay. They had each other. And nothing would ever take that away.